A Study in Scarlet. Chapter 1. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. In the year 1878, I finished my studies to become a doctor of medicine at the University of London. After that, I went to Netley to learn how to be a surgeon for the Army. Once I finished my training, I was assigned to the 5th Northumberland Fusiliers as an assistant surgeon. The group was in India at that time, and a second war in Afghanistan had started before I could join them. When I arrived in Bombay, I found out that my team had moved deep into enemy territory. Nevertheless, I managed to catch up with them in Kandahar, and I started my work right away. The war brought honor and higher ranks to many, but for me, it only brought bad luck and trouble. I was moved from my group to the Berkshires, with whom I fought in the terrible Battle of Maiwand. There, I was hit in the shoulder by a bullet, which broke the bone and nearly hit a major artery. If it weren't for Murray, my brave assistant who carried me to safety, I would have been captured by the enemy. After that, I was very weak and in pain, and had to be sent with other injured soldiers to a hospital in Peshawar. There, I started to get better and could walk a little. But then, I got very sick with a fever that is very common in India. It was a tough time, and for a while, people thought I might not survive. When I finally started to get better, I was still so weak that the doctors decided I should go back to England immediately. I traveled back on a ship and arrived in Portsmouth, my health ruined, but with permission to try and recover for the next 9 months. I had no family in England and was completely free to do as I pleased, within the limits of a small daily income. Naturally, I ended up in London, the big city that attracts people from all over. I stayed at a private hotel in the Strand, living a sad and empty life, and spending my money too quickly. Soon, I realized I had to either move to the countryside or change my way of living in the city. I chose the latter and decided to leave the hotel for a cheaper place to live. The day I made this decision, I was at the Criterion bar when someone tapped my shoulder. It was young Stamford, who I knew from my days at Bart's Hospital. Seeing a friendly face in the big city was a real comfort. Although we weren't close friends before, we were happy to see each other now. In my excitement, I invited him to lunch and we went off in a cab. "What have you been up to, Watson?" he asked, surprised at how thin and tanned I was. I told him about my recent troubles, finishing just as we arrived for lunch. "Poor you," he said, feeling sorry for me after hearing my story. "What are you doing now?" "I'm looking for a place to live," I replied, trying to figure out if it's possible to find a nice, affordable room. "That's funny," he said. "You're the second person today to say that to me." "Who was the first?" I asked. "A guy from the hospital's chemical lab. He was upset this morning because he couldn't find someone to share some great rooms he found but couldn't afford on his own." "That's amazing," I exclaimed. "If he really is looking for a roommate, I'm the perfect person for him. I'd much rather live with someone else than alone." Young Stamford gave me a curious look over his glass of wine. "You haven't met Sherlock Holmes yet," he mentioned. "Maybe you wouldn't like him much if you had to be around him all the time." "Why? Is there something wrong with him?" I inquired. "It's not that there's anything bad about him. He's just a bit unusual with his ideas, a real enthusiast about certain parts of science. As far as I know, he's a good guy." "A student of medicine, perhaps?" I guessed. "No, I don't think he plans to go into medicine. He knows a lot about human anatomy and he's really good at chemistry. But I've never heard of him taking any official medical courses. His learning is a bit random and unique, but he knows a bunch of stuff that would surprise even his teachers." "Didn't you ever ask him what he wants to do?" I wondered. "No, he's not the kind of person who talks easily about himself, though he can be open when he feels like it." "I'd like to meet him," I expressed. "If I'm going to share a place with someone, I'd prefer someone quiet and serious. I'm not ready for a lot of noise or excitement yet. I had enough of that in Afghanistan to last me for a lifetime. How can I meet this friend of yours?" "He's probably at the lab," Stamford answered. "He either stays away from there for weeks or spends all day working. We could go see him together after we eat." "Sure," I agreed, and we changed the subject. As we headed to the hospital, Stamford shared a few more details about the man I might be living with. "Just so you know, if you two don't get along, don't blame me," he said. "I only know him from seeing him at the lab. You're the one who suggested this, so it's on you." "If we don't get along, we can go our separate ways," I replied. "But it seems like you're trying to avoid any blame here. Is there something I should know about his temper, or what?" "It's hard to explain," he laughed. "Holmes is a bit too scientific for my taste. It's almost like he's too cold. I could imagine him experimenting on a friend with some new chemical, not to be mean but just out of curiosity to see the effect. To be fair, he'd probably try it on himself too. He loves precise knowledge." "That's a good approach, though." "Yes, but it can be too much. Like when he hits dead bodies in the lab with a stick to see how bruises form after death. I've seen it myself." "And he's not studying medicine?" "No. It's a mystery what he's really interested in. But here we are. You'll see for yourself." We went down a narrow lane and into a part of the hospital. I knew my way around, so I followed Stamford to the lab without needing help. The lab was a big room filled with bottles, tables with science equipment, and blue flames from little lamps. Only one student was there, deep in his work. When we walked in, he looked up, excited. "I've found it! I've found it!" he told Stamford, holding up a test tube. "I discovered something that reacts only with blood and nothing else." He was as happy as if he'd found treasure. "Dr. Watson, meet Mr. Sherlock Holmes," Stamford introduced us. "Nice to meet you," Holmes said warmly, surprising me with his strong handshake. "You've been to Afghanistan, I see." "How did you know that?" I asked, amazed. "Don't worry about it," he chuckled to himself, his mind already moving on. "The real issue now is about this blood test I've developed. It's quite a breakthrough, don't you think?" I nodded, though I was more curious about its practical applications. "It sounds chemically fascinating, for sure, but how does it really help?" You see, it's a major step forward for both medicine and legal matters. It provides a fail-proof way to identify bloodstains. Let me show you." He was full of excitement, pulling me over to his work table. "We'll need some fresh blood," he said, pricking his finger and collecting a drop in a tiny tube. He mixed this tiny drop with a large amount of water, making it look clear again. "The amount of blood here is incredibly small, but watch this," he added, dropping in some chemicals. Suddenly, the water turned a dark color and a substance settled at the bottom. "Remarkable, isn't it?" he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up with joy. "This test is much more sensitive than any old method. It works on both new and old blood, which could be crucial for solving crimes." I couldn't hide my surprise. "That sounds incredibly useful," I admitted. "Exactly. Until now, distinguishing what certain stains were could baffle even the experts. But with the Sherlock Holmes test, that's no longer a problem." His enthusiasm was infectious. I congratulated him, impressed by his dedication and the potential impact of his work. He listed several cases where his test could have been decisive, showing a deep familiarity with criminal history. Stamford joked about Holmes's encyclopedic knowledge of crimes, suggesting he could start a crime newsletter. Holmes took the idea in stride, mentioning he had to be cautious because of his experiments with dangerous substances. Then, Stamford steered the conversation back to our original purpose. Holmes was interested in sharing accommodations, and I was looking for a place to stay. He mentioned a suite in Baker Street that seemed ideal for both of us, provided I didn't mind his smoking or his experiments. He inquired about my own habits, leading to a light-hearted exchange about our potential cohabitation. Holmes was curious if violin playing would bother me, to which I replied it depended on the skill of the player. Pleased, Holmes suggested we view the Baker Street rooms together, making plans for the next day. As we left him to his work, I pondered how Holmes knew of my time in Afghanistan, a question that amused Stamford. "That's just one of his unique skills," he explained, hinting at Holmes's mysterious ability to uncover information. "A lot of people wonder how he does it." The mystery intrigued me further. "Oh, a mystery, is it?" I exclaimed, thrilled at the thought of unraveling Holmes's methods. Stamford warned me that Holmes was a complex puzzle, suggesting that Holmes might learn more about me than I about him. With a final goodbye, I continued to my hotel, deeply intrigued by my new acquaintance and looking forward to discovering more about him.
English Storyteller JB, like and subscribe.